A big trial started yesterday in France, an important one. It's a trial of 15 suspected terrorists behind those terrible attacks 5 years ago on staff of Charlie Hebdo, a satirical newspaper, and also on a Jewish kosher market. 17 people were murdered, including journalists and cartoonists, because the Islamist terrorists didn't like them drawing cartoons of Mohammed. The killers themselves were shot dead. Those on trials are accused of helping them. Now, back then, there were big protests here in cities like Sydney and Melbourne defending free speech, and many protesters holding up signs and chanting the big slogan then, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie, in solidarity, free speech and all that kind of stuff. Such hypocrites. Joining me are Gemma Tognini, columnist with the West Australian and communications consultant, and Liz Storer, head of Advance Australia, Conservative political group. Liz, big protests in Australia back then, free speech. How does that look now when we have this cancel culture, violent protests against Conservatives and Donald Trump? You've got left-wing groups threatening advertisers of Conservative shows like this and on 2GB, and now a pregnant woman arrested at home in front of her children for posting on Facebook an ad for a protest against Victoria's bans.
A lot's changed in 5 years, Andrew. A lot has changed indeed. Firstly, with this poor lady in Victoria, my goodness, it should have been a phone call. We've got to weigh these things up on motive, and this woman meant no harm. Ballarat is in stage 3 lockdown. She thought it would be okay. And can you blame her just weeks after the Premier let 10,000 Black Lives Matter Marxists walk their way through Melbourne like it wasn't an issue? To Charlie Hebdo, I have to tell this because I just thought this was brilliant. On Wednesday, when the trial opened, Charlie Hebdo edition came out. They had republished the very caricatures of Mohammed that had inflamed these people, these terrorists, to the extent that Charlie Hebdo employees lost their lives. And I just thought it was such a brilliant act of defiance. This is the kind of tenacity that we need to see when standing up for something as basic, of freedom as freedom of speech, expression, freedom of the press. And when Turkey's foreign minister came out yesterday condemning this and calling on politicians throughout Europe to disallow this from ever happening again, the French president, President Macron, who I don't back on any other day really, but will stand with him on this, he said absolutely not. Here in France, we have the freedom to blaspheme. He said we have freedom of conscience.
I thought that
and it
was
was
great.
Such a brilliant mic drop moment.
Look, that front page of Charlie Hebdo had the cartoons, and it said all that, the murders, all that for this. I'll discuss this more on my show tomorrow night and show you the front page. Gemma, what did you make? What do you make of the fact, we had all those people, all those politicians at the time saying, Je suis Charlie, I'm for free speech, and instead we've seen free speech roll back across the country?
Well, if ever we needed evidence, Andrew, that we live in a nanny state and we're actually not the stuff of the charge of the Light Brigade anymore. We're the stuff of the let's stand in line and do as we're told and be incredibly compliant while our freedom is robbed from us right under our eyes. We can't say we don't know what's happening. It's happening right now. And I could not believe, although, you know what, I kind of could believe, we had Premier Andrews standing up today going, yeah, I haven't seen that vision. Either he's full of it or he's not doing his job. And I think we know that both of those things can be concurrent when it comes to the Victorian Premier. But that made news all around the world, and rightly so. And it's not just the arrest.
The Premier didn't see it. I don't believe it. You don't believe it, Liz? Do you believe that the Premier did not see it?
Not for an instant. And I tell you what, Andrew, if this woman, this Ballarat mum, was Indigenous, we would be all deafened by the screams of the left by now.
My goodness.
Completely deafened.
My goodness.
But where are they? Where are they standing up for freedom of speech? Where? What? Nothing. Crickets.
I agree, and I'd really take your point about it. She didn't think the ban applied to Ballarat. A simple phone call, as you say, would have solved everything. Gemma, I've got to I've got to look at you with a little bit, I'm a bit wary here. What the hell is going on in Western Australia? You guys are banning tourists even from the next door state, South Australia, which has
don't tar me with that brush.
Zero. You're sitting there. You're sitting there.
Not me. I'm all about letting us out. Listen, Andrew, I'm prisoner number K140ZG. That's my prison number from the Soviet state of Western Australia. Listen, I saw that the front page of the West today, which is the paper I write for, obviously, that Andrew Clennell referenced just before. And the only thing that I would say about polling in general is if all polling was infallible, then Bill Shorten would be in the lodge and Hillary Clinton would be President of the United States. My question around any poll is what was the sample size, how was it conducted, how was the question framed, over what point of time, all of those questions. And even so, I just don't buy the 91%. I don't buy it. I don't have to buy it. I didn't do the polling myself. My point is this. You only have to listen to Talkback over here and read letters to the West Australian newspaper where people are pleading for there to be some sort of flexibility and relaxing. The one thing I would say is that if 91%, if in the unlikely event that it was true, Andrew, that's a hell of a way to fall, isn't it?
Well, I think, Liz, be careful about what you wish for, because the consequences of these bans will be felt later. People are cushioned from the effect by this monstrous tide of social welfare spending. And they've been deliberately terrified. But you explain to me why it's worked so well. Now, Liz, why has this panic, this sowing of panic worked so well?
I gotta say, I found it alarming. I didn't think Aussies would fall for this to the extent that they have, and they have. The reason why these premiers are doing this is that, surprisingly, this pandemic protectionism has actually gone really well in the polls. And I was in Perth earlier this year. People loved being behind a closed border. I was in Queensland earlier this year, and again, the family I was staying with loved being behind a closed border. And now that I've made myself sound like a super spreader this year, we've got Scott Morrison at the moment. We've got our Prime Minister looking like the only adult in the room. Last week we saw him come out announcing legislation that's going to stop Premier Dan Andrews' plan to make this Victoria a vassal state of the Chinese Communist Party. Thank God for that. And as we watch this border fiasco continue to unfold, more and more eyes are turning to the feds, because if anyone can intervene, it's them.
You are both correct in saying that, the Prime Minister and the Treasurer, I'd add to that, look like the only adults in the room, but they've got no power. This has exposed the limitation of federation.
Well, they have constitutional power.
Well,
don't they, Andrew?
Why don't they
section
test
of the Constitution. Maybe they are. But do you know what I think is more shameful about this? If you think about yourself as a premier who has traded on, perhaps at the very initial stages of this pandemic when people genuinely didn't know what was going on, we have the benefit in Australia of looking over other nations and seeing what they've done and seeing what has worked and hasn't worked, including all of the data that's now emerging, conclusive data that lockdowns are worse than the actual virus on any metric. You had a cohort of senior doctors this week saying to Premier Andrews, stop these lockdowns. It is devastating on so many levels. But if you're a premier who has traded on fear for the better part of a year and now you find yourself in a corner, what do you do? How do you turn around and say,
He's doubling down.
It wasn't
He's doubling down, Gemma.
It wasn't as
He's doubling down. He says, we don't want to go this far for nothing. What he's really saying is, I don't want to lift the bans and admit they were for nothing.
There will be a reckoning, and it will be brutal.
There will be a reckoning, but I'm not so sure. Gemma Tognini and Liz Storrett, thank you both so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Andrew.